Hello and welcome. You're watching QTV and you are watching the Week in Review. And for both regular and new listeners, I have to say a big thank you to all those people who've been contacting us saying you missed the show, when are you coming back, on Twitter, on Facebook, and even in the streets. And as ever, I have my co-pilot, Mr. Mamadou Mboj. Mr. Mboj, as ever, welcome to the program.
I'm glad to be here, Adi.
And I think you were saying that you'd had similar experiences with people who were telling me before the show.
Absolutely, yes, regularly. They'll stop, hey, Mr. Mboj, and of course when they say Mr. Mboj, they'll ask what, Ade. And sometimes some people will even call me Ade.
I get the same.
Said I get the same. Confused it there. So I was really pleased. I was touched as well. I keep telling them, oh God, whenever you say that, do you know what that means? It means I have to work harder to make it better all the time. So the pressure, but fantastic.
Yeah, it's great. And there you go. And so if anybody's joining us for the first time, this is how it goes. And even if you've been with us before, 10 stories that I've chosen from the week. They might be not your favorite 10, but they're mine. And sometimes I have an ulterior motive as to why I chose certain stories. And we'll play a clip and then we'll go through them and we'll discuss them. So enough of all this chat, let's get cracking, shall we? The first one, actually recently, just a couple of days ago, it was World Creativity and Innovation Day. And around 2017 or so, the UN decided to make it not just about creativity and innovation, but to see how these things tied in with sustainable development goals. Anyway, enough of my chatter. Have a look at this clip.
Her skills to address environmental problems, Senabu won the GCCI 2022 Trade Fair Award for her magnificent creative idea of using bubble plastics to produce varieties of materials. She says the pandemic is a huge challenge, which forced her to unleash her creative and innovative potential.
Had proposals to other institutions like the KMC and the Ministry as well of Education did contract the young entrepreneurs for face mask production, in which I was lucky to produce 8,000 face masks. In the society, we have so many things that we can utilize and so many things that we can transform, recycle, reduce and reuse.
There you heard Senabu Gay, young entrepreneur there, Mr. Mboj. And as I was saying in the lead up to that clip, they decided to change it, kind of tweak it a bit and say, okay, let it not just be about innovation and creativity. Let's kind of make it innovation and creativity about something. And that something is, of course, sustainable development goals, contributing to your national economy and so on. A good thing?
Yeah, that was precisely it. For instance, well, for me, when I saw it, I said, oh, here we go again. We tend to conflate or at least bring within the orbit of entrepreneurship, innovation and entrepreneurship, which seems to me to be so quite very limited. Of course, we know the work,
of course,
but there's something else. What does it mean? Even the creativity, we say you have to think outside the box.
Yes,
you have to ask yourself, what actually
what
is the box?
What's the box? What's the box I'm thinking outside of?
That sort of thing.
Yeah.
So you begin to realize that the reason why the UN have used two terms, creativity, innovation.
Yeah,
they don't quite mean the same thing. One is the thinking, the other one is the demonstration, the doing it. But then you wonder, do I need to have certain conditions in place as a society that would encourage? It's like the soil. Then things will grow. Is there such a thing? For me, this is where my mind was going in that direction, I have to say.
And as the day came closer, because, I always give people these days and say, go and do a story about it. As it came closer, I thought, let me see what they're doing in other countries. And the one that impressed me the most, in India, the government has really gotten behind it and they make a big deal of it every year. And they encourage people and they give prizes and so on. And it's like a really huge show in India. And I thought, wouldn't that be nice if we did something similar in the Gambia? Really kind of got the nation involved.
Oh, absolutely. But you know what I did? Before we come in, I just looked at the sort of Industrial Revolution as a kind of case study, because that was where you had technological change, social change for what economic development in the end we also what happened. But who are really the people behind it? It wasn't about government institutions and the like. From what I hear, people like Cartwright, Owen. So that was why I asked, do you need perhaps to create a certain kind of society and just leave people
Yes,
I'm telling you, enabling, absolutely. And then people can do all sorts of things.
Yes, yes.
You know, perhaps that's what we need, because what is the box? I don't know.
Well,
just create it, open it, just we'll decide.
And, you know, it's interesting you say that, because if you look at the Indian example, it's that kind of thing. I mean, they're kind of letting people go on and do their stuff. But what they then do is they encourage people to send in examples of people doing exactly this kind of thing, and we will reward them. Sometimes we give them grants, sometimes we give them loans. Sometimes we just give them money to kind of take their business to the next level. And so they stay out of it. It's not like they kind of engineer the whole thing, but, you know, they just thought, oh, this, you know, these people might need a push, a shove or whatever. Let's help them, give them that shove. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. That element must come in sooner or later. Sure. Be it the government with regulation to try to help to control it, or investors coming in. So eventually that was what happened in Britain, wasn't it?
Exactly.
So sooner or later you'll have a coalescence of all of these factors, stakeholders, if you like, into it. But for me, something like a creativity and innovation day, for instance, in a school, if I were head of a school, I have an interesting chat with my students on a day like this. What does it mean? And the larger picture as well. Because what I focus on, what I spend my energy on, what I expend my energy on, I think is so often perhaps determined by certain social background factors. And we want this kind of thinking, this kind of being, to be part of my culture. It's my heritage. It's universal. These things are universal. So I consciously make it, you know, part of my culture. I mean, Western society did. We all own it, but they've decided to take it on for themselves in a self-conscious way.
And I think that what you said earlier about an enabling environment, I think if that exists in the government, in society, I think that encourages it. So thank you for that, Mr. Mboj. And so, yes. So, and I said, you know, I had an ulterior motive. If anybody watched the longer version of that on the news, you will see that all the instances, all the people we interviewed, they're all young people, because I know there's this kind of obsession with young people thinking, I can't do anything in the Gambia. I need to take a dangerous journey abroad to make my life. Actually, that's not true. You can make it here in the Gambia. So please check it out if you can. Once again, Mr. Mboj, thank you for that. And now on to something completely different. The National Audit Office have just recently issued a report, and it was looking at government's response to the COVID-19 funds and how those funds have been dispersed, spent, etc., etc. It didn't make for very good reading. Have a look.
As I shared earlier in my remarks, the report we are launching today is specific to the procurement and distribution of food and medical items within the Greater Banjul area and some parts of West Coast region.
The report reveals that there were missing documents or vouchers and delivery notes, and therefore certain expenditures could not be verified. There were also delay, damage and unaccounted for items in the buying, distribution and storage of the medical, food and other items. Furthermore, purchased items were poorly managed and some were even missing. There were also inappropriate procurement and contracting processes, and certain purchases were made without planning or conducting proper assessment, leading to the wastage of public money.
There you heard from both our colleague Omar P. Jallo and also somebody from the National Audit Office, and Mr. Mboj and viewers, before we came on here, a friend of mine, Dr. Robtel Paley, and I were discussing this, and she said to me, isn't it depressing every time we have this in Africa? This is exactly the kind of report you hear. In Sierra Leone, we had it around the time of Ebola. There are still people being prosecuted for that. But Mr. Mboj, I said to my colleagues again in the office when we were discussing this before I come to you, I said, we've never had a pandemic before to deal with. And so we didn't have structures that we could put in place to actually govern until I heard the chap from the NAO said, we gave them a guidebook and we brought them in and we explained to them how they should go about this thing. And yet we still had what we heard.
Absolutely, and yes, in Africa I was, but in Britain I remember was it Boris Johnson with the VIP lane?
Well, that's right.
So it seems as if there's been a bit of it around the world, you know, being corrupted out in one way or another.
And before you go on, let me just quickly say that I'm glad you said that, because in Britain, I mean, there were several companies that belonged to members who were either members of the Conservative Party or strong supporters of the Conservative Party, who made a ton of money and got lots of contracts to do with COVID masks and testing and so on. And so it's a global problem.
Absolutely. And for me, sort of, I tend to make these comparisons, not as a mitigating factor, as it were, just to understand the problem that I face.
Yeah.
Then maybe that would help me in, you know, the kind of solutions I could be innovative.
Sure.
Talking about that in my solutions. So for me, this is how I see it. But even before this report, the minister said it.
Yes, quite. He'd gone to a press conference, and he'd also said it in the National Assembly.
Absolutely.
That there had been, as we speak, he's actually holding a press conference to actually address some of the ones that relate especially to his ministry, because it was about medicines and food. So he's dealing with the medicines part of it, and the fact that, some of the procurement principles were not followed and so on. It would be interesting to see what he has to say about that. But as we said, it's kind of depressing that, and you don't mitigate by mentioning what happens in other countries around the world. We need to up our game and stop doing these things. People should stop seeing this as an opportunity to local balance chop, really.
And the fact that he came out and said it.
He said it. He said it publicly.
That in itself was really explosive, wasn't it?
I remember at the time it made headlines and went viral on social media.
Then we move on. Then it appears to me that they know the problems we all do.
Sure.
But I don't think they've got any solutions. They don't know what to do.
How to get a
that
handle
was
on
just an outburst. I think
Sure.
he was frustrated.
Sure.
He had to let his hair down, as it were.
Yeah,
so that was it. So the bureaucratic mess, we all know about it. We've been talking about it. To my mind, this is the deeper legacy of Yahya Jammeh's 22 years reign.
Well, this is it.
So there was no talent coming through. Recently, what's been happening here politically, one of our political scientists call it a class coup. It's been a class coup for a while now.
It has been.
What we've got here, the elites, the intellectual elites, as it were, have been displaced in many ways.
And to pick up on that,
so
if we look at some of the debates that were held leading to the National Assembly, and we have to be honest and blunt about this, some of the people who came and debated, I would be horrified if those people ended up being my National Assembly member. They could not even justify a simple question, why should people vote for you? If you can't answer that question, what are you doing standing for the position?
That's it. And I think the number of candidates that we interviewed, I think we had a representative sample of really what's the talent out there. And we all saw that. Remember that as part of the debate, we had to move to local languages.
Well, that's right.
Because we felt that people wouldn't be comfortable in
And some would be more comfortable in that.
Stuff like that.
Yes.
And to my mind, I understood that. Yeah, we are going by the 1997 Constitution. According to that one, all the debates will be in English. The analysis of bills will be in English. Most things that I do will be in English.
Sure.
So therefore, the electorate had the right to see you do the interview throughout in English, because your competence in it is one of the factors that I'm going to take into account when I'm going to vote for you, because it's a tool that you need in the National Assembly.
Sure. So there you are. Please, can we return to a meritocracy? Thank you for that, Mr. Mboj. Now on to another matter. Many people have been following the Truth, Reconciliation and Reparations Commission, TRRC, and it named certain people. One of those is actually about to face trial in Germany on Monday the 25th of April. And as German law prescribes, he can't be named fully. So if somebody is charged in Germany, they don't give your surname, they just give the initial. So he's being referred to as by L. You, I, and everybody else know that he is by Low. Here's a clip.
Bailo is accused of having been a driver for the junglers in the commission of these 3 crimes against humanity between 2003 and 2006. The alleged crimes were allegedly committed in the Gambia, and the trial is to take place in Germany under its law of universal jurisdiction which allows the country to investigate and prosecute suspects of certain serious crimes under international law, irrespective of where they were committed and the nationality of the suspect or victims.
Dulcet tones of our colleague Mohamed Lamin Choi there. Now, just to be slightly controversial, every time I hear of this sort of trial, I both kind of welcome and dread them. And I say this not because I want to sit on the fence, but lots of Africans seem to be the ones who tend to get dragged to court under these sorts of laws and rules. You heard it said there, the person doesn't even have to be a German citizen, the crime doesn't even have to have been committed in Germany, and yet he's facing a court in Germany.
Absolutely. They call it universal jurisdiction.
Sure.
Now, this is the thing, the idea.
The whole universe consists of Africa at the moment.
Absolutely. Yes, there has been a worry about these things, you know, be it with the ICC,
sure.
you know, and international instruments like that. I don't know, for me, I'm a bit philosophical about it when I go to the UN. When I go to most of these international organizations,
Sure.
Africa, you know what I mean? They all sort of have no respect. Let's be honest with ourselves.
They have no power.
They have no power in most of these things.
Sure.
So why should I crow foul, if you like, in a particular example?
Sure.
When I see the whole landscape, I don't know. So for me, not that I want to resign. I just want to understand what the problem is.
Yes, I used to get called.
Start from there.
I used to get called by Al Jazeera in London, and I hope you're watching this. And they'd called me to talk about Charles Taylor, and again, Rob Tell will know about this. And they expected me to just kind of blanket, go along, and so on. And I said, well, it's interesting. I said, had Charles Taylor been British or American, would he have faced this court as it was? They were really upset with me, and they never invited me back, having invited me several times to give analysis of case. And you know, and it's around this kind of thing where, you know, African leaders, African politicians, and Africans generally get you know, paraded in front of these courts, tried and so on. We're not saying they didn't commit the crimes, but there isn't an even playing field, and we don't pretend there is. There's a kind of one law for us and another for the rest of the world. You can't imagine an American being arrested and charged in Germany in the way that bylaw has been.
That is it, and that is the sort of thing that actually sort of sticks in the gut, really, for a lot of people, or granted. But at this point, what is it I can do about it? I don't know. But I know that bylaw committed some awful stuff here.
Sure,
so
sure. and he needs to face justice somewhere, anywhere.
Justice somewhere. Sure. With the big picture, I don't know what to do, but the smaller one, well, he said it himself. Just when he left, you know, he had to flee, went to Germany. He was on social media.
That's right.
You know, online regularly. Sure. So giving us a narration, giving us all sorts of things. So we knew. So it was surprising, not surprised, during the TRRC. So we were just listening to the witnesses to see whether there would be that congruence, whether they tallied of what they said and all the things we were hearing and what they said in the testimonies. And that's all very, very true. This is very interesting, perhaps, because we've got a TRRC, which is slightly different from the straight prosecutorial one.
Indeed, indeed.
Perhaps for bylaw, given what we've got, the institution we've created for that sort of thing, perhaps would it have been better for the two governments, whatever, then he comes back, then we see how do we deal with that, given what we've decided that's how we want to deal with this.
Sure, and that's why I'm interested in the case, because as I said, it starts on the 25th of April, and I gather that they will be inviting some of the people who gave evidence in the TRRC to go to Germany and give evidence. So it will be interesting to see, but thank you for that, Mr. Amroch. And now to stay with legal matters. In a report we did on this lady, we mentioned her as an international legal luminary. Who am I talking about? Have a look.
During her tenure, the former ICC prosecutor led several strategic and managerial initiatives and expanded her office's activities to cover 14 investigations and numerous active preliminary examinations of conflicts around the world. The investigations included alleged human rights abuses in Palestine, Myanmar, Bangladesh, Ukraine, Colombia, Venezuela, Georgia, and so on.
Then you also have the Central African Republic. This is also a very high profile. Central African Republic, you have the Cote d'Ivoire case, which involved the former president, Laurent Gbagbo, and also other cases in Cote d'Ivoire, which I just started before leaving.
Fatou Bensouda there, Mr. Mboj, and for our viewers, you've been denied the chance of hearing and seeing Mike Pompeo, the American Secretary of State, because we were warned after we played the video on the news that we shouldn't. So that's why you don't see him. And that's what comes next. And it's what I was talking about earlier. She decided to go into what happened in Afghanistan. And of course, America was then caught in the net. And they took the unprecedented step of sanctioning her and her team, withdrawing their visas, freezing their bank accounts, the whole shebang. That's the kind of thing they can do. Precisely. And that also tells you the scale of challenge that she had, faced. when and this was when she was ICC prosecutor, by the way.
She was ICC prosecutor. Absolutely. I was reading, I tried to sort of get what I call a sort of independent expert sort of assessment of what Fatou Bensouda did at the ICC. So this person started by putting it in context. Who was the previous chief prosecutor, Ocampo.
Yeah, yes, quite.
Apparently there was so much incompetence. He talked big, just targeting. It was during his period that the targeting of one side, Africa in many ways, that was really at its highest. You're telling here where Kenya, Uganda, Darfur, Democratic Republic of Congo, and all the rest of it.
Quite.
That was when you had the kickback against the ICC and all of these things. But apparently when she took over, she brought back sanity, calm, amidst so much hostility. You just opened the whole discussion with
and it was like venom from the White House.
In many ways. One person said, she's brilliant, tough, fair, and the reason that the OTP, the Office of the Prosecutor, has not collapsed under the weight of Ocampo's incompetence.
Well, this is it. And in fact, when she was leaving, I mean, all the kind of glowing tributes seemed to go beyond just the usual platitudes. People talked about the changes that she had wrought in the position, the sort of completely reorganized the whole thing, how they functioned, how they dealt with cases, how they investigated cases, and they paid glowing tributes to her. And one of the reasons I chose this, again, the kind of ulterior motive, is that, in the Gambia, since I've been here, I've noticed that, women get a raw deal. Hardly any women in the National Assembly. The few that are, there are almost as many nominated as there are elected. And yet we have lots of brilliant Gambian women who are doing their stuff around the world, and she's just one of them.
Absolutely. Can you remember some period way back? Not that long, not that far back actually, when it comes to all indices, all these rankings and brain drain. Can you remember for our size? It was astonishing, really, because I think we were third or fourth. We were top there, given our size.
Quite.
Oh, absolutely. We know exactly what we've gone through. That was why earlier on the so-called class school, it happened because there appears to have been a vacuum, as it were, and it had to be filled. This was it had to be filled somehow. So this was what happened. But we know what we can do. We've had past examples.
Of course.
So it's just a matter of how do you recreate it?
And how do we get back to that?
I mean, things have moved on.
Of course.
We can never, the arrow of time, as they say, is just one direction, isn't it?
Quite.
But how do I reinvent? I suppose this is what we're talking about here. Really, the creativity and innovation is a matter of reinventing. I once read, I'm listening to an anthropologist, quite interesting, did an experiment, went to Kenya, looking at, because they were trying to introduce their year-round farming, so they brought in all the implements and stuff. But most people just wouldn't touch it. One or two did, but when they're supposed to farm, they don't. And then she realized that people's lives were intertwined in all the social activities. So during that period, there's something else that they need to do, or stuff like that. So the suggestion was, there's something called sort of social innovation. that would really complement, you know, this technology and all the rest of it. Is it bring as much as you want?
Right.
But it all depends on the personnel.
Indeed.
How do we talk about it here?
It
depends on me. Whether what you bring will complement, you know, will work for me, then we can move on.
Sure.
Or that it might even be a waste.
Yeah, indeed. You can't graft on something that works somewhere and think, oh, it must work here as well. And, you know, just to give a Gambian example, when they were talking about the access to information bill, and I said, if you knew the technology that needs to be behind that to make it work, the number of personnel that you need in every government department, every government ministry, every local government agency, we just do not have that structure. So we can't pretend that just because they have it in England and America and in France, we're going to have it here. It's a joke, honestly. I mean, you know.
A simple website.
Yeah.
I'm a company. I've got my website. You see, the idea of having a website, you see, that's one thing, is what I'm trying to bring out here. But the people, you would write to them. You know about that. I mean, the last post, 2 years ago?
How many times have I complained?
How many times have you been pissed off about what's going on?
Yeah, quite.
So there must be, I have to be in a certain way.
Sure.
For the technology to work for me.
Exactly.
Otherwise, we just leave everybody frustrated.
And this is it. And we're just paying lip service to that. Thanks for that, Mr. Mboj. We still have a few more stories to go. Now on to something else. If you're as old as me, the Standard Chartered Bank has been around for as long as I can remember. So to hear that there were quite cataclysmic changes they were pulling out in certain countries, including the Gambia, Sierra Leone, etc., that was quite a shock. And anyway, certain key executives have not only come to assuage everybody's sort of fears, but they also went and they saw His Excellency the President. Here's some of what they had to say.
One point that was emphasized is that the staff of the bank, there will be no adverse impact. Nobody is losing their job. There will be no redundancy. Staff will continue to have their jobs. They will continue to get all their full benefits, all the privileges that they are currently enjoying, they will continue. When the bank is sold to a new investor, the expectation is that that investor also wants the bank to do well. And the most important asset that the bank has is the people. So I'm sure the investor will also be very keen to retain the people so that he can then work with them to grow the bank to the next level. The clients also, it's important that they are given assurance. Of course, they have come to expect very high standards from Standard Chartered Bank, the professionalism, the integrity, the good corporate governance standards that we have maintained in this country. We expect that that should also continue under new ownership.
There you would have heard a strange sound. That was the sound of the peacocks at State House, by the way. They were just in the background there. But really, what we heard there, and one of the reasons, again, why we showed this particular one, Mr. Mboj, was because people kept contacting me and saying, what does this mean? Are they going to close down everything? Is everybody going to lose their job? And that's really the reason why I wanted to show it on the news and also on this program.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. When these announcements are made, obviously people, the first thing they worry about is jobs, what will happen, what are the implications. And so they've tried really to reassure, to assuage the fears regarding the repercussions of it. But when I heard the gentleman there, and I thought, yes, they will have their pay, everything will remain there. For how long?
Yes.
And they have certain expectations of the new owner. I do not know how solid that is. I just don't know.
Yes.
They expect this.
How do you build it into the contract for somebody who's going to take over?
Exactly, stuff like that. So, yes, at least in the short term, these people are taking care of what happens in the longer term. You must keep watch what's going on here. Yeah,
sure. And, just to say, Standard Chartered Bank, been in the Gambia for 128 years. And so, for many people, as I said, it's quite a shock. But I think we have to wait and see.
And the reason,
it's kind of...
Absolutely. When I looked at the reason, they said we are what? We are quite subscale. And they're looking for, I thought,
Well, just if anybody doesn't know, in the 7 countries that they named, including the Gambia, they make up less than 1% of the global profit of the bank, and that's why they're kind of pulling out operations. But essentially what they're doing is they're selling their share of the bank that exists in the Gambia. Currently 25% of that is owned by Gambians, and the 75% is owned by the global Standard Chartered Bank.
And
so
it's the 75% they're selling.
So we watch this space. And at this point, I think we will take a break, and then when we come back, we will have 5 more stories. So don't go away. Join us after this break.
Looking for the fastest and easiest way to receive money transfers from abroad? Well, QMoney and RIA just made it happen. Now you can receive international money transfer from RIA directly into your QMoney account with no additional cost. Once you receive an SMS alert about your transfer, walk into any QMoney agent across the country to receive your payment for free, or use the money immediately to buy credit, QPower, and other QMoney services. It's fast, safe, and convenient. For more info, call customer care on 133. QMoney, Sinu Calpe. Terms and conditions apply.
Hello and welcome. You're watching QTV and you are watching the Week in Review. And yes, we are back, myself and Mr. Mboj. Mr. Mboj, I've enjoyed it so far. I hope you have too.
Oh, it's been stimulating. Fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, on to something else. Some of the stories that we show on the news, we show them for a reason. You know, we want to make a point. We want to raise certain issues to the public and make the public aware. This particular one, I'd been hearing that help was at hand for the women fish smokers of Kartong. And so we went there to see whether this was true and how happy they are about this. Guess what? There's been no help forthcoming. Have a look.
Hadijuf has been working here since she was a teenager, and she used to take care of her family from her earnings here. However, she got sick from the smoke and was asked to stop working. This smokehouse should have been built so the smoke goes up, but we have seen that is not the case here, and you can barely even see due to the smoke. When we start smoking fish, we are forced to stay inside despite the smoke to avoid causing a fire incident here. This is not good for our health.
There you heard our colleague Jennifer Sonko, as well as Hadi Juf, one of the fish smokers, Mr. Mboj. And as I said just before that, you know, sometimes we don't apologize for why we show those particular stories, because over time, over the last 3 years that I've been here, they've had an impact. People have come to their aid, come to their rescue, and we certainly hope that is the case here. But I wanted to show it because I was quite horrified by the conditions where they smoke the fish. The gate is completely gone. And so they have to have somebody stay there overnight because things get stolen. And one woman said, and we didn't show that, but she said something as small as a bag of salt. And she also wasn't talking about a big bag. She said a small bag of salt gets stolen from here because there's no security. But, you know, they're quite an important part of the economy, because when I came here, I realized, unlike Sheridan, where I grew up, certainly in Freetown, where people eat more meat than fish. Here, people eat more fish than meat. And so people who smoke fish are quite an important sector.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we are being coastal.
And I've been to a few of these communities.
There's sort of this island-like feeling.
Almost,
that sort of thing. So this is it. But for how long we've been talking about the structural deficiencies?
Sure.
So, sort of, we'll be talking. I mean, if you're going to follow this kind of news, I mean, every week.
We could. And in fact, I think we have another one. We do have another one later on in the program. But you'll see.
So now, perhaps we must help. I don't know. Can we help? Then what next?
Sure.
This is where I keep thinking that maybe as a strategy, I don't know, could sort of civil society be organized in such a way, perhaps even in collaboration with the diaspora? You see, I'm thinking in this level, and this is interesting.
Because some of the offers of help that we've had, in fact, as soon as that story ran, were from the diaspora, saying, well, you know, who do we need to get in touch with, and so on. So, you know, it does touch people, and that's the beauty of us being, you know, online. You know, we're on Facebook, we're on YouTube. and we're you know, on the website, you know, www.qtv.gm. So that sends it out to the world, and people from the diaspora have gotten in touch and said, you know, can we help? And that's kind of, like I said, you know, sometimes we have these ulterior motives, and that's kind of why we do these stories.
That is really it. So perhaps this is where we want our kind of civil society to be, to lead the way, until we sort of take care of the politics, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
Especially with our experiences recently. I mean, everybody who's been looking at our political situation, you're just looking and say, I mean, you reacted the other way. You couldn't make it up. I mean, sometimes, God, fact is really stranger than fiction. Extraordinary. So that's it. So how do you, what will be the strategy, given that this is your reality? So that's for me, that's the difficult question that one must ask ourselves right now.
Perhaps we should leave that question dangling.
You know, really.
And get somebody to answer it. Because, you know, like I said, they contacted me and I was a bit perplexed. Like I said, well, I don't know what I could do to help other than to showcase the challenges and the difficulties and hope that somebody will pick up the baton. So yeah, so let's hope somebody does. Thank you, Mr. Mboj. And now to something completely different. Mr. Mboj and I are both huge football fans. We won't mention Liverpool or Man United because my team has even stopped playing football this year. But for the Gambia, we had a fantastic experience of our first ever AFCON. We got as far as the quarterfinals, and what an enjoyable ride it was. But guess what? It's already time for the next batch of qualifiers. Have a look.
It's not the most difficult group possible, but it's also not the most easy group. I think the moment we start underrating our opponents, we will not qualify. There are two countries who are better ranked on the FIFA ranking than us. For sure, Mali is the favorite, but also Congo-Brazzaville is a good football nation. So it won't be easy, and even South Sudan we can't underestimate. It's a fair group, fair draw. In this group, everyone can win against each other and everyone can lose against each other. So it will be very important that we play consistent.
You know, Coach Tom Sanfie there, reading from the book of football cliches. Everyone can win against each other, everyone can lose against each other. There are no easy games, you know, unless you're playing Man United, of course. But Mr. Mboj, expectations have been raised to heights, and yet, you know, to get to this stage, we had a very tricky tie against Chad, which we just sneaked through by 1 goal.
Yes, and I hope that the expectations wouldn't create some kind of pressure.
Sure.
That's really what my fear.
I think they will. You and I know that as we watched the Gambia go through the last AFCON, in our studios, in our offices, people were berating the coach at every turn, even as they were winning games. There were people here who genuinely thought Gambia should go all the way through and win the damn thing. And that was not likely to happen. And yet, such were the expectations. And now, having gone as far as the quarters, first of all, if they don't get out of this qualifying group, which is semi-scary, he said it was a fair group. And if they do get out and then don't get beyond the quarters, some people will see that as failure. And yet that was our first ever appearance in AFCON.
Absolutely. And in our group, Mali, Congo, South Sudan, well, he said, because we've beaten them in the past before. So in theory, we can beat them. Whether we can reproduce such performances to beat them, that's something
Although
else.
we've beaten them in friendlies, apart from
Mali. Was it the one we
beat
in
in
AFCON?
AFCON.
In the AFCON
That's right.
In Cameroon, we beat Mali. So, yes, this is it. I think this battle will be more psychological maybe than anything else.
This is it. So,
because the expectations have been raised so high.
Sure.
We punch above our weight, really getting to the quarterfinals. And you all know that sometimes you need to go back a few steps for you to return. It's all part of the, what they call the learning curve,
the learning curve,
as it were.
Absolutely.
So we will see how it goes. I mean, to me, they are heroes anyway, but I know that we have a bit of growing up to do. So let's reduce the pressure. Maybe they will lighten up and say, man, look, let's just go and play.
Yeah. Let's hope they take that attitude, and let's hope the fans take that attitude as well. Thank you for that, Mr. Mbod. But yeah, you know, we wish the Scorpions well, and we really hope they, in fact, I hope they win the group. But you know, if they do, it will be a pleasant surprise. And now on to a completely different story. We've had presidential election, we've had National Assembly elections, and now we're about to have by-elections. Why? Well, because some councillors actually decided to stand down as councillors in order to contest the National Assembly by-elections, and having stood down, those seats fell vacant, and so within a couple of months they have to have a by-election. You want to know more? Have a look.
Council, the area council, that is for the Cardiff Municipal Council and for the Brikama Area Council, because those 4 councillors resigned to enable them to contest in the National Assembly elections. So meaning that the seats for those 4 councils, 4 wards are now vacant. So based on that fact, then the by-elections will be conducted on the 14th of May 2022. Of course, as a legal requirement, the elections should be conducted after 2 months of the vacancy.
Pa Makan Kande of the Independent Electoral Commission. Mr. Mboj, now just to show you how naive I am, because we had record numbers of people register before the presidential election, and then we had record numbers vote. Come the National Assembly election, I was hoping for that trend to continue. It was a damp squib. It was the opposite. Whereas there had been engagement, there was now apathy. Why the change in 4 short months?
Yes, and quite drastic as well. As you said, 51%, I think.
Yes.
51.2. So something like that.
From almost 90% in December.
Yes, but I went back. We had, is it Jammeh's time, was it 2012, around that period? We had, for the National Assembly elections, 19%.
Yes, I saw one where 90%,
like
because people had kind of given up and thought, you know, it's a done deal, you know, why bother vote? Yeah.
Sometimes when you look at it, we tend to be so sort of condescending about people thinking that they don't understand. I think they understand our winner takes all kind of politics. What matters is really the president in
but this is it, and that's why people felt enough of engagement to turn out in such numbers on December 4th.
Yeah, this is how the politics of patronage works, and you've got all these levers, you can pull all sorts. And some political analysts here will tell you that a lot of people, not necessarily that they like Barrow, they just didn't like to say no Dabo.
Yeah, that's right. I've heard that.
So we have this
and vice versa, to be honest.
Exactly. So this mixed sort of emotions, this mixed picture of what's been going on. So come the National Assembly elections, I say, look, this is not about Barrow anymore, really. Barrow has sort of receded somewhat because now the candidates matter.
And
is it Adib Darame? Is it Mahmoud Mboj? Or is it Korka? Who are the candidates? So the people, there are local elements.
And I'll tell you what kind of depressed me. Several of my friends who are intellectuals, people I felt are engaged, none of them voted. And I asked 4, maybe 5 of them, and they all said the same thing. It's almost as if they were reading a script. They said, I didn't even know who the candidate was in my constituency. And that really shocked me. And I thought, these guys had all these months to campaign, and they blew it. They didn't go out, they didn't engage with the public, didn't say, this is me, vote for me, this is why you should vote for me. And that's one of the reasons. I mean, I had a spat on Twitter with one of the political parties. I won't mention who they are, but people can probably guess. Because I was saying that, you know, your poor showing was not down to anything other than you did not use the opportunity that was given to you from December to the time of the polls to go out to canvass in a proper way to say to people, this really matters, vote for us. And that's why we have effectively a hung parliament. President's got 18. UDP have got 16 seats.
Perhaps with the 5
and
nominations.
Then with the nomination, but it still doesn't give him a kind of majority that will tilt everything to rubber stamp whatever he comes to the National Assembly with.
Yes, this is it. This is a trend we've seen for a long time, isn't it? The so-called educated, as it were, that class and the well-off, you know, economically, that class don't really vote in many ways, really. I think when they enter politics, they just want to come and go to the top. We all saw the presidential candidates.
Yeah, quite.
Not one of them
decided to stand as
the
National
National Assembly. So this is the interesting thing here, because normally when you look at, for instance, in the US or in England, you are told that sort of middle-class people tend to go and vote.
Yeah. Yes.
So sometimes you get candidates trying to get so-called working classes. Come on, you know.
Right.
So for us, we've just reversed that.
Yes,
quite. The so-called educated, they've come to what I call a bourgeoisification of the elite. For me, the elite does hard work in many ways, but it's the bourgeois who is the raptor, taking everything. It's just material. Everything is just material.
Right.
I think the true elite is really serving a public function. It's just that we say, you know, anywhere you go, some people can do things better than others. I mean, that's just in everything. In football, we get our best.
Exactly.
So we don't like saying stuff like that.
Yes.
But in reality, that's how we live.
Yes, indeed. And interesting, you mentioned about none of the presidential candidates, and that you can contrast that with what happened in Sierra Leone, where Kande Yumkela stood unsuccessfully for the presidency. He didn't get it, but he then contested and he was elected. He's now in the parliament. He's a member of parliament.
Halifa Saleh could have joined the cabinet.
Said
no.
Yeah,
you know, ran for president, went into
That's right.
So it seems that the so-called educated class, I don't think they sort of understand that historical role that we need to play. You know, just post-independence. The Nkrumahs, everybody, they were all PhDs, Jawad, a doctor.
Well, this is it.
You know, that was their role. They saw that historical moment, as it were, you know, that existential moment. There's something that I need to do as a society, if you know what I mean.
Yes,
that sense.
I don't get that sense now from many of the politicians.
We become cynical and just retreated into our bourgeois homes. We became bourgeois, I suppose.
Time is our enemy. We have two more stories. But thank you for that, Mr. Mboj. But good luck to those who are going to be voting on the 14th of May. And we will watch those elections with a great deal of interest. I think 10 seats are up for grabs. So it'll be interesting to see who wins those. It could make quite an important difference. Now on to something else. When we were discussing the other story about the carton fish smokers, I said to Mr. Mboj, there's something else coming up. And this one is about a huge market that was started by the Gambian Women's Federation. And then they ran out of money. And for 5-6 years now, nobody's come to their rescue to actually help them complete the market in the way that it should be completed to make it viable. What's he talking about, you're thinking? Have a look.
Binta Kujabi and Sirakuli, both market vendors, are among the few that occupied the desolated facility when it was under construction a few years ago. After witnessing how the newly constructed market became inundated with water during rainy season, stopping buyers as it became unsafe, they chose instead to erect stalls in front of the market gate to continue earning a living. We are appealing to the government to investigate the issue of this market because it is in a strategic location. Let them help us as petty trading is our livelihood. The market construction started since Jammeh's time. The bare ground, which is unpaved, stops us from operating. We have been pleading with the government to help complete the structure so the women can come here and do their business. If this market was completed, it would boost the economy.
I have to say, I was horrified when I saw the size of this place. I think it's 1.3 hectares. It's huge. And it has lain like that. Viewers would have seen the images there in that story. It is a massive place. And yet you've got these beautiful structures. And yet, obviously, you can just imagine what that would look like every time it rains. It would be an absolute mud patch. And since then, since 2016, they've not been able to get anybody to come and say, okay, we know you guys have run out of money. This is a really good initiative. Let us. And so because I was horrified at the fact that such a place existed, I thought, we have to do a story about this. And maybe it's because people aren't aware.
Yes.
Well, Mr. Mboj, I mean, you mentioned earlier that, you know, we could keep bringing these and we could have one of these every week, probably every day on the news. But what can be done?
That's it. For him, I was thinking was, who did the planning? They said halfway or three-quarter way, whatever, at some point they ran out of money.
Sure.
So you can see the organizational chaos in the first place.
And maybe their ambition was too huge. Maybe they should have done half of it. It's a massive site. I mean, I know people get a sense of it from there, but I wish we'd done a drone shot and then people would have gone, oh, wow, it really is that kind of wow sort of thing. It is huge.
That's it. And even when they talk about when it rains, what happens, it tells you that it was ill thought through.
Sure.
That sort of thing.
Right.
So here the problem is just there are commonsensical issues here. So the Federation, the Women's Federation,
Gambia Women's
Federation, saying that they're looking for help, bail out for somebody to come and complete the structure for women to use it.
That's right.
Maybe they might get one. I mean, this coverage helps, that sort of thing.
Hope so.
But you have to think about it.
You know, what was the planning behind it and so on? You know, was it thought out?
It takes more than goodwill.
Yes, I mean,
it takes some competence to get the outcomes.
You see, what this reminded me of was in Sierra Leone, immediately after the war, there was a kind of splurge of schools being built by people who were going for parliament and so on, which was brilliant because, you know, education system had suffered. But you know what they hadn't thought about? Teachers. Yes. So they built these schools and then they didn't have teachers to teach in them, and just complete stupidity, really. And so I'm not saying this is stupid, but you do wonder, you know, what were the thought processes that it got to this stage. Because as it got bigger and bigger and got nearer to completion, they must have been thinking, hang on a minute, we're not going to be able to complete this. Do we need to start lobbying now rather than build it and then lobby, which is kind of where we are now.
It takes more than goodwill, you know what I mean? The sentimentality and all of that. How did Lee Kuan Yew call it? I mean, the model.
Yeah.
You got to have a model that is capable of giving you the right outcomes. It doesn't matter what. Don't be too sentimental with things. You know what I mean? Otherwise, you just keep on complaining all the time. You're not going to see the outcomes that you need to see.
Yeah,
there has to be some cognitive acumen, if you know what I mean. There must be technology, whatever they call it. There must be technique in what I do, how I do it.
I can't just go on pure emotion.
No, I just can't go on pure emotion. So let's sort of stop that.
Yeah, sure. But having said that, I wish them luck, and I wish somebody does see this and says, I'm going to help them. So thank you, Mr. Mboj, for that. And that takes us on to our final story. Now, how many times have you heard there's been a military takeover and the military say, we are going to sort things out, we're going to put everything on the straight and narrow? Yeah, I know. We've all read that book before, haven't we? Chad being the latest. Have a look.
However, since taking power, the 30-year-old military general has fallen short of delivering on expectations to bring democracy, peace and stability to Chad. The military junta had promised to lead an 18-month transitional government led by General Deby, within which time the army vowed to hold democratic elections. However, 1 year on, amidst a fast approaching deadline, there are fears that the ground may not be fertile for holding elections. Abi Sani, a security expert with the Jadike Center for Human Security and Peace Building, as reported by DW, says nothing significant had changed in Chad since General Deby took control. As before his father's death, Chad still faces major issues such as militancy and insecurity.
You know, when we were about to do this story, Mr. Mboj, I thought, you know, I've been binging on YouTube, watching coup d'etats across Africa, not because I'm somebody who likes pain or anything like that, but I wanted to go to all the initial speeches that all the newly installed coup makers said. So most of them said, we've come to put the country back on track. We've come to deal with corruption. We've come to deal with ineptitude. We've come to deal with nepotism and so on. Deby, when his father was killed, stepped in and made this very bombastic speech and said within 1 year we would have got everything. So on track that we'll be able to have elections. Now, we've only got a couple of minutes on this, Mr. Mboj. So, well, like I said, in the lead up to that, we've all heard this before. They're now saying even that he might want to stay in for as long as his father did, which was close to 20 years, I think. But there's been no progress in Chad, has there?
Yes, I mean, it's almost like an archetype. Because you hear it everywhere, this particular strong man. And the rhetoric.
Yes, we had it in Guinea, had it in Mali.
Recognizable. It's just part of the feature, I think, of our politics as things are right now. And the other interesting bit as well. Oh, is it 35-year-old? This young man, can you imagine? He just thinks that he and his father are sort of interchangeable. I mean, he just want to privatize the state.
Because there had been rumors before the father was killed that his father was grooming him to take over anyway. And so when his father died, he wasn't even next in command. He then engineered a coup to actually get them to elect him as the most senior, and that never ends well. As you know, as I said, I've been watching all these coup things, and trust me, that kind of, when you engineer yourself to the top, like the resentment it creates will end up leading to your death one day. And you know,
and for us, I think the trap we're in is that I was reading something the other day. France never really condemned him, that sort of thing. So you have these powers, this malign, I call them, powers behind the scenes, propping you.
Yes, indeed, indeed.
So you can enforce your own will on others and that sort of thing. So this is really the trap we're in. You have the archetype within, and then you have this force, this enemy that looks like a friend.
But
be careful of those.
A great point to end it on. Thank you, Mr. Mboj. And that brings us nicely to the full stop at the end of the program. And just to say to Mr. Mboj, thank you as ever for your interjections. You're most welcome. And of course, to the viewers, I have to say this every time. Thank you for watching. And again, I really have to say thank you for all the fantastic messages. Until the next time, it's goodbye from me. Goodbye.